We are so lucky to have Bill Buchanan for our speaker today. He was sworn in as a second lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps after graduation from Oregon State University. Bill served as an infantry platoon commander on combat in Vietnam, achieving the rank of captain. He then entered the FBI, serving as special agent in Oklahoma, Chicago, and then the San Francisco field offices. Bill investigated general crimes, white collar crime, foreign counterterrorism, and foreign, i.e., Soviet counterintelligence. And he graduated with honors from the Defense Language Institute here in Monterey. After retiring from the FBI, he and his colleague Rick Smith formed Cannon Street, Inc., and it was a private investigation firm with offices in San Francisco, and he now continues his investigations as Buchanan and Associates in Mill Valley. Well, as we all know at the Breakfast Club, Bill pursues his passions, and there are many of them: wilderness skiing, land navigation, bird hunting with Whisper Ridgeback with a Vengeance, and more. And even more interesting and important, he supports charitable organizations. Bill has cases, he's got stories, and criminal pursuits that are fascinating and that he will share with us today as he talks about his journey. So most importantly, Bill, we thank you for your service. And please join me in welcoming our very own Bill Buchanan.
Thank you, Susan, for that great introduction. The check's in the mail. And it sounds like a bigger crowd than I see on the screen. Anyway, thanks very much to the board for inviting me to speak before this group. I've always admired, the intellectual diversity and the interest in the professional backgrounds of this outfit. That's why I stayed on board for as long as I have. So, good morning, everyone. I think the best way to start this presentation is perhaps to answer a question that may be floating around in your mind, that is, why would anybody join the FBI? To roll it back to 1968, I mustered out of the United States Marine Corps as a captain, and then my folks were living down in Los Altos. So like a lot of military folks, I looked around and thought to myself, oh, what's next? I did some things in the interim. I sold recreational property up in the mountains near Highway 4 for a few months. I sold New York Life Insurance. And then I started looking around for something, permanent. These were all part-time sort of space fillers, if you will, time fillers. And so I said, well, I did quite well at Oregon State in English, had a minor in English. Let's see what's going on over at Stanford. Maybe I could get a master's over there. So I walked over to the campus, no appointment or anything, just walked up to the English department, knocked on the door of a Professor Bruce Franklin, didn't even know who he was, and sat down with him in his office and told him what I was trying to do. As soon as he found out that I was a Vietnam veteran, things got a little heated. We had an interesting discussion, about what was going on overseas. And it turns out he was a Maoist. He had a framed portrait of Mao Zedong and Ho Chi Minh on his wall. It turned out he got fired later on, he got fired from Stanford because he was an inveterate rabble rouser. So they had kicked him out. Anyway, I said, I don't think I want any part of that. So the next thing, my dad said, hey, there's a little publishing company advertising for associate publisher down in Palo Alto. Why don't you go by and see him? So I went by and talked to the principal. He said, well, we could use some help. Well, here's an application. go on in that little room and fill it out, and we'll see what happens. So I was about 10 minutes into the application, and this woman walked in and she had a scowl on her face. She looked very angry, walked over to me and hissed, literally hissed in my ear. She said, you know, you can fill out that application, but we don't hire baby killers in this company. I said, well, this is not exactly a good fit either. So I walked out of there, and the next thing I thought to myself, you know, I was kind of spinning my wheels here. What I really want deep down inside is I want to join an organization that addresses major issues, preferably on a national basis. And I thought back to my childhood. I was born in Quantico, Virginia, where the FBI Academy is, for God's sakes. I got my Boy Scout fingerprinting merit badge there. I mean, all these things are kind of coming together. I'm trying to describe how I finally came to the conclusion, the FBI. And there was also, I had a friend who was also a Marine vet, and he was actually going through the process with the San Francisco office of getting into the Bureau. So, you know, he introduced me to some special agents, and I started the application process. Now, mind you, if you roll it back to 1969, which is when I was processing in, the country is being almost torn apart by protests against the Vietnam War. You remember that. It's just all kinds of instability and violence and that sort of thing. It was very destructive, but I continued on with the process. The other thing I remembered was that when I was going through basic school as an officer in Quantico again, we were rolling out to the rifle range or something like that, and somebody pointed out the window. One of the officers pointed out the window. He said, "See those guys over there at the pistol range, with wearing snap brim hats and suits? Those are FBI agents, and you know they pay those guys $800 a month to do that kind of job. And then when they get to their first office, it's $1,000 a month." So that memory came back to me. That I said, okay, that's it. I want to join an outfit that's elite again, and is targeting foreign spies and organized criminals, not just street criminals, but organized criminal organization. If I make it, I mean, you know, the qualifications were quite stringent, even back then under Hoover. So anyway, I qualified through my application at the San Francisco office. Claire had typed up my application on Smith Corona, and off I went to Quantico. It was about 14 weeks. I was sworn in back there for the second time in my life, sworn to protect the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. So here I went. And it was 1969, November. And I went through the academy, which at that time was in Quantico, but part of the instruction was up at the Department of Justice in DC. All kinds of subject matter, which you would, you know, firearms and investigative techniques, photography, and all that sort of thing that you would expect. And then what they did with the class, we had about 45 in my class, was, and this was standard, was about 2 weeks before you graduated, they gave you your office of preference, which was misnamed because you put up, you know, three choices. Nobody got their first three. So I was assigned to the Oklahoma City office. And we had, you know, this instruction, especially up there at the Department of Justice in DC. We had a little ramshackle apartment out in Arlington, Claire and I. She'd never actually left San Francisco, so all this is very new to her. But we got on a bus, and they would drive us into the Department of Justice and then back again at night. So it was commuting by the bus. One morning was a snowy morning, about 4 inches of snow on the ground. I ran out, jumped on the bus, and from the back there was this yelling. They said, "Stop the bus! Stop the bus now!" I looked out. Here's Claire. She's wearing a light bathrobe, very little underneath. It's flapping open. She's got no shoes on. She's running across the snowy lawn, holding a bag. it's my lunch. I forgot my lunch. This is how she is, though. Anyway, so off we went to Oklahoma City. And the first office policy in the Bureau at that time was you link up with a senior agent who's going to be pretty much your mentor. We went through, the process of getting used to the procedures and reporting involved in these federal crimes, all of which had an interstate aspect, that sort of thing. And we actually, the most exciting part of Oklahoma City was a tornado that came through and devastated part of the town and killed about 5 people, including a pastor who lived right across the street from the FBI office. Anyway, I learned a lot there. That policy of, having a first office, which was a little bit, less complicated than New York or Washington, D.C. or anything like that, was a very good formula. So I spent three months in Oklahoma City learning the ropes, and then they said, we need a guy up in Tulsa. Now, the way the Bureau is organized is that you'll have a field office like San Francisco, but you might have a satellite office like Oakland, okay? So Tulsa was a satellite office of Oklahoma City. Claire and I, picked up again, here we go, and settled into Tulsa. I worked a variety of criminal matters. And then, I went back and forth when I was putting the presentation together as to whether or not to mention the shooting incident in Tulsa, which some of you are aware of, because it came up during a presentation years ago. I can't remember how. Somebody asked a question when I was up at the podium. And anyway, here's what happened. I think I'm obligated to bring it up because of the national conversation over law enforcement use of deadly force and, that sort of approach. So here I am, first office agent. I had on my portfolio of cases a federal fugitive case out of Virginia. It was an individual who had been charged with rape and kidnap. And then the DA there in Virginia had asked the federal government for what they call a unlawful flight to avoid prosecution federal warrant. So I had that on my list. On the morning of 7 December, 1970, that date might ring a bell with some of you. I got a call from an informant and he said, he's in town. And that was the guy I was just talking about, this federal fugitive from Virginia. He's headed for Mexico, probably at one of the bus stations. Well, there are only 2 bus stations in Tulsa at that time. One was Continental Trailways, the other was Greyhound. So I called up George, or I got him on the radio. He was my partner. I said, George, let's go. Went down to Continental Trailways bus station and went up to the ticket agent and started talking to him. Next thing I know, George takes off on me, goes to the corner of the terminal, and I look back. He's got his hands in the air, and a guy is pointing a handgun at him. I said, well, this thing is spinning out of control here. So I took off through the terminal. I used to run track in high school, and I don't think I ever ran 100 yards that fast in high school. But anyway, I took off. I said, I got to get around him. The Marines, will recognize, Tim will recognize the flanking maneuver. I said, I got to get around the side of this guy. I went through a restaurant, yelling at people to get down, that sort of thing, out into a stairwell, just enough time to see this fugitive standing by a taxi at the curb. He's got a 19-year-old woman in sort of a headlock. He's pointing a gun, waving it around. He's already got my partner in the far side of the taxi. So what I was able to do was get down in the stairwell and shoot him twice. And he went down pretty hard. He got one round off at me, but just kind of hit the wall. And, that was pretty much it. It was over with. He was arrested for assault. I think he passed away. He was very, very seriously injured by the incident. Anyway, so the footnote that kind of disturbed us a little bit and gave us a kind of a wave of relief was that when we searched his luggage, we found kind of a manifesto that said, I guess it was, everything, all the recriminations he had against society and the usual stuff. But he said, I want to go, he said, I want to go out in a hail of bullets. He said, I'm not going to be taken alive. He wrote this down in his little manifesto. And I want to go out in a hail of bullets. He had 50 rounds in his field jacket. He had 2 other boxes in his luggage. So I said, this could have broken really, really bad. So I'm just glad that George and I were able to get out of that the right direction. So my tenure at Tulsa was up in a couple of months. So we got orders to Chicago. So we better move on to Chicago before Susan gets mad at me and goes Chicago on me before I go Chicago on her. Anyway, so off we go, driving up to Chicago. Again, Claire's, small town, not small town, but Chicago, San Francisco. The squad that I was assigned to had a pretty good reputation for good work, a lot of activity. They were involved in investigating interstate transportation of stolen property and thefts from interstate shipment, that sort of thing. And as you know, Chicago is pretty much a transportation hub, not only airlines, but rail and trucking. So it was a very active squad. There were actually 2 levels of thefts. One was from, those of you know, Chicago, there's a belt, what they call a belt railway. It's a railway that goes all the way around the city and kind of connects the incoming main rail lines. And then, of course, there's the trucking industry. So there were some local thieves who were working the belt railway, and they would steal a whole bunch of TVs and things like that and scatter like rats out into the brush. And then the next level was more sophisticated. It was mafia involvement of taking whole trailer loads, across over into Indiana. It was very common. Claire will tell you, for me to get a call at 2:30 in the morning, hey, Bill, let's go. We got one load that's going down to East Chicago or something like that. Okay, fine. So, these are pretty good sized loads. The one of the cases I remember was a load of aspirin, and we don't need to do any jokes on that. But it was a $100,000 load, and we ended up arresting a bunch of guys, including a kind of a minor mafia type. I think his name was Ryan. There was another minor mafia guy, Sam Bills, who was on the roster, by the way, of the mafia there in Chicago. And anyway, this guy, Ryan, lawyered up, and his lawyer took the case. We wanted him to give handwriting samples, but he refused. So his lawyer took the case all the way to Supreme Court. And after the grand jury indicted him and wanted, the handwriting sample. And what happened was he lost. So he had to give the handwriting samples and ended up in jail. The other case that I remember from being in Chicago was in June of 72. I was assigned to what they call an in-service. That's FBI terminology for a special instruction session back at Quantico, back at the Academy. So I spent, I don't know, maybe 10 days back there, came back and started unpacking my bags. Phone rang. Claire says, your supervisor, John, got on the phone with John. He said, hey, Bill, pack your bags. I said, John had just unpacked them. What's going on? He said, there's been a airline hijacking. You're going to Peru, Indiana, which is actually right across the state line. Little rural place surrounded by cornfields. And he said, we're going to be searching for the hijacker. So anyway, I reported it in to the special agent in charge of that investigation. And it turns out that the backstory was that the day before, a Rich Wank, you're going to, buddy, can you wake Rich up? He's going to like this. A Boeing 727 had been hijacked by a guy who was named Martin McNally, and he wanted $500,000 and a couple of parachutes. So anyway, the flight went back and forth. I was very confused. Finally ended up going over Peru, Indiana. I mean, you'd have to look on the map to find out where that is. But at night, he told the pilot, he said, Rich will agree that there's a ramp on a 727 that goes down, and you can, if you're on the tarmac, of course, you can walk off the plane like that. Well, the defect was that even back then, even when airborne, you could get on that thing. So the hijacker told the pilot, look, throttle it back. I'm going to jump. So the pilot looked at his flight panel, saw a green light that indicated that hijacker was on the ramp, and he goosed it up to about 650 miles an hour. And, the hijacker disappeared into the darkness. Well, we were out there scouring the fields for this guy. What happened in retrospect was that he landed, but he didn't have the money. The money went one way at 10,000 feet, and a submachine gun that he had went another way. So we were, 150 special agents and local law enforcement out there just, scouring the fields and woods for this guy. Finally, I got a phone call from a farmer. He said, look, I've got a bag here that says American Airlines on it. And we went out there, and there were footprints all around this bag, because initial indications were, and the hijacker said this himself, I've got explosives. I'm going to put explosives in this bag. So this farmer said, there's probably $500,000 in there, but I don't know. So we finally took possession of this bag, and we found the submachine gun 2 miles away, and some clothing and stuff like that. And, we were staying in a local motel, a bunch of us, had not, at that point, we had no idea where he was. We had these items. It just so happened that the chief of police of Peru and his wife were out on just kind of a drive on one of these rural roads, see this young man walking along the side of the road, and they picked him up and started chatting with him and took him to a motel. Well, the motel was where we were staying. The searching teams were staying. So all of a sudden, this hijacker finds himself right in the middle of a bunch of FBI agents and local law enforcement who were looking for him, but had no idea. He had a mask on when he was in the aircraft doing the hijacking. So we really had no idea what his facial features were. He had a general description of him. I think he stayed overnight. He got out of there. He had a friend of his it turned out he was from Detroit, and his friend came down, picked him up, and took him back. Well, all this time the investigation is going on. We finally focused on him. I forget exactly why or how, but anyway, physical evidence and some other evidence pointed us towards Detroit. We arrested him. He was covered with bruises from the parachute. He said it was like hitting, when he jumped off that ramp, it was like hitting a brick wall, literally. I mean, he was all bruised and everything. Anyway, so he got a serious sentence, like something like 2 25-year sentences. He was buried. Let's see what else. The other thing that happened in Chicago, which is kind of traumatic for Claire, was that we used to take the, how are we doing for time? 24. We used to take from our little townhouse that we bought down in Richton Park. I don't know if you know about that area. It's 30 miles south of the Loop. And we used to take the Illinois Central electric train up to the office. And I would go in early, and she would come on a later train. I was in the office one morning, and a clerk ran over and she said, Bill, there's been a huge crash on the IC, on the Illinois Central, and Claire hasn't checked in yet. I said, oh my God. So I grabbed a squad car, went out, red light and siren all the way down to where this crash scene was, which was just maybe half a mile south of the office on the incoming IC tracks. It was the most horrific thing I have seen in a long time. And that was that basically there were some new trains that they had just put into service, double deckers. They looked like airline aircraft fuselages, you know, double decker. And then there were the old ones from the 1930s that were, you know, solid iron. And that one of those trains was coming north, just south of the new train, which was stopped at a station. And he was this older train was barreling along, struck, rear-ended the new train, actually telescoped right into it. I don't have to tell you what kind of massacre that was. 45 people lost their lives. Claire was in the train that hit the new train, and she was able to disembark and get out with another agent who happened to be there and walk up the side of the rail past all this carnage. And she still talks about it today. But I had gotten myself up on a little knoll with some kind of steam vent was there. You know, I could hardly see, but I looked out in the crowd, and here's this umbrella opening and closing. Claire had seen me up there. I couldn't see her, and she was signaling me. So we finally, you know, got back together. I said, "Oh, thank God, you know, you weren't in the first train that got hit." So that was exciting. So at one point, and I'll start wrapping it up here. In Chicago, I had been there for almost 3 years, doing pretty much the same thing, going to terminals, talking to truckers, talking to you know, the people working in the terminals about these thefts. And I would just start, you know, how it is when you go through life, you're looking for another challenge. So it's almost like Groundhog Day, although I enjoyed what I was doing. So I said, you know, actually headquarters came to Chicago and said, look, Middle East is really heating up. We're starting to get more airline hijackings. We want some qualified special agents who did well in the Army language aptitude test, the ALAT, to go back to Monterey. And I asked Claire, and she said, you're even asking me? Let's go. It was a year course in Arabic. So we went back there, spent 1974 studying Arabic. And finally, I actually did pretty well. I was surprised because, I mean, I was good at, you know, things like French and Spanish, Romance languages. And Claire, of course, was ecstatic because she was back in her hometown. And so after that, I was assigned to San Francisco, and I worked on for about 10 years on the counterterrorism squad. Now, you know, you have to understand the intensity of the cases was nothing like we have today, where we had 9/11, we had little cells, you know, floating around the country, getting ready to take out, you know, a ball game or something that'll be a mass casualty situation. But we were interdicting some intelligence operations. I had one case where Libyan intelligence from Tripoli had contacted somebody who was running a little photo shop down on Market Street. And all they said was, we intercepted this conversation, you guys take it into the end zone. So I identified the guy, put a femme fatale informant against him. She learned a whole bunch of things about him. I interviewed him, he said, okay. And we turned him, so he was working against Libyan intelligence. I called the case Maverick because he was a aviator. And so anyway, that worked out quite well. And then, of course, I got involved at a certain point with the Soviet squad, what they call the Soviet squad, which is working against the KGB and the GRU up on Green Street. And there was some pretty interesting cases there. Those guys were pros, I'm telling you. And of course, as a counterintelligence agency, we had our work cut out for us. I'm telling you, these guys were very, very professional and effective. The one thing, I'll wrap it up because I've got exactly 50 seconds, but one thing that spun off of the assignment to the Soviet squad was headquarters came back and said, hey, we got 2 slots in the State Department to go, special agents who are working counterintelligence to go over to the Moscow embassy and just learn how a hostile foreign intelligence agency, namely over there, of course, the KGB and the GRU, operate. So I joined up with an agent from New York, Bill Sinekas, Lithuanian background, fluent Russian speaker. And we started settling in Moscow. We were in a hotel right on the Moscow River called the Ukraina. And we had to walk or take a cab to the embassy right across the river. And that was interesting. We were over there supposed to be over there for 6 weeks, I think it was. But anyway, one evening I told Bill, I said, I've got to take my Nikon over to Red Square. I want to take some night shots over there. So we spent about an hour. And then at the end of that, I lost track of him. He disappeared. So I took a cab back to the Ukraina, was, dressing down to get in bed. I had my skivvies on. That's about all I had on. Knock on the door, open the door. I said, Bill, what? It wasn't Bill. It was one of the most beautiful women I've ever seen. Platinum blonde, all the accessories, little handbag. She said, may I come in? I said, no. I closed the door, called Sinekas up. I said, hey, you won't believe this. And so anyway, it was kind of a clumsy attempt, obviously, by the KGB. They didn't know me. They didn't know Claire. Okay, so anyway, that one more thing. I just want to slip this in. About 3 days later, the regional security officer, who was a Department of State employee, he had just come from the embassy in Lebanon, if you believe that, taken over. He said, okay, everybody pay attention. There is something going on in the Soviet government. We don't know what it is, but all hell is breaking loose. Everybody stay in the embassy. You could see the Marine security guards running up and down the passageways, rocking their Model 870s with buckshot in it. And then we saw these armored personnel carriers start running past, rushing past the embassy, and we could hear gunfire at night. Well, what it was the coup attempt against Gorbachev. And he was down in Crimea. I think it was in Odessa. And this little group in the Soviet government said, hey, this is the opportunity to take out this guy. He's getting too close to the West. He's starting to undermine our, relationship with the Soviet republics. Let's take him out. Well, you know how it ended. Actually, we went out into a sea of people that were surrounding the White House. Boris Yeltsin became prominent. He was standing on top of a tank, and he convinced everybody, let's just knock this stuff off. And the coup failed, basically. So we had to get out of there, though, because it was so unstable. So the SRO told us, going back to your field offices. I think that's about all the time I have. I appreciate your attention. And if there's time for questions, I'll be willing to take them on.
Bill,
yes,
this was fascinating.
Oh, thank you.
And I think the best line was, they didn't know Claire. I would share this. You talked about the trains and then the mafia in Chicago and the RICO. Cousin Andrea's husband, Morty, was an independent thief. He was a fence for some of the stolen goods.
Oh, really?
I don't think and he did end up going to prison for a year.
Really?
So I think they do catch them. And I think they didn't divorce for another 5 years, but that's another story. But I can just see the mafia doing all this. This is even more fascinating than I thought it would be. Thank you. And I'll turn it back over to you, President Tony.
Thank you so much, Susan. Patricia Fripp, I see your hand, followed by Richard Wank.
All right, Bill, love hearing these stories. One, femme fatales that you used, were they FBI agents?
No, they were not. They were individuals that we had more or less selected out for their skills. She was Persian ancestry, Iranian citizen who was naturalized, and she had We had a lot of good talents that we could use. She was very smart. And so, anyway, she was not a special agent.
All right. Next quick question is, if it's possible to remember, I know when you're chasing bad guys, there's got to be a lot of adrenaline and, you know, your endorphins.
Mm-hmm.
How many times in your career, if it's possible to tell us, did you really think this might be the day that Claire gets a notice, I'm not coming home?
Well, and there were, I think the best example was that incident in Tulsa. But, you know, that's a good question, because if you're involved in a deadly force incident, you know, before it happens, you often wonder, well, how am I going to react? And what I concluded was, based on my previous experience in the Marine Corps as an infantry commander, I had incidents where, you know, definitely more than once. I mean, every day we went on a patrol, we'd pretty much get into a fight. And there were times when I said, well, you know, this could be it. But the thing that happened in Tulsa was the same feeling. A lot of adrenaline, but the training kicked in, and that's very important, because, you know, you're in a state of mind, high stress state of mind, in something like that. And if you don't have a framework of training, things could go very bad.
Bill, you worked on the case with Ted Kaczynski, did you not?
Reluctantly. I did work on what they call the Unabomb Task Force in San Francisco. As a matter of fact, my supervisor, Max Knoll, gave a presentation to the Breakfast Club on the Unabomber case. He does an excellent presentation. If you're interested in that case, I would recommend to the speaker committee that we might want to look at Max. He's over in the East Bay. I think he still works for the state in some capacity. But anyway, I say reluctantly because I was just getting going in my white collar crime investigation career, which I'd always wanted. I wanted to, you know, the model case for me in white collar crime would be the Toronto's case. But of course, you know, the timing wasn't right. But so they recruited me to go over to the Unabomber Task Force, and it was more like being a physicist in a laboratory looking for quarks going across the film or something. I was very exacting, and I just didn't care for it. But the task force did a great job. You know, you know the story. I won't go into it because it's quite lengthy. But the task force in San Francisco pretty much broke the case after 16 years. Great piece of work.
Bill, again, thank you for your service in both capacities. I have a question, though. I've always wondered about, in typical local law enforcement, there's departments, robbery, homicide, there's drugs, there's gang units, there's canine units. But whenever something happens at the federal level, it seems like the FBI offices just empty out. Are there departments within the local offices that deal with, say, kidnapping or white collar crime or interstate theft, hostage recovery? I don't know. How is a FBI office organized?
Basically, it's a bifurcation between national security and criminal. There are two divisions. The main divisions in Washington, D.C. headquarters. So there will be further breakdowns at the 56 field offices. And each has its own little satellite offices around, like the one I told you about in Tulsa. Mm-hmm. And they will address, whatever issue comes up according to whatever squad they're on. I mean, if you, in San Francisco, for instance, when I was working there, they had for example, on the national security side, they had a Soviet squad, the one I worked on. They had a foreign counterintelligence, a foreign counterterrorism squad. They had a Chinese squad, and this is ironic. I can remember listening to a conversation between two supervisors about Chinese intelligence efforts back. This is 1976, let's say. And they were going at each other because one of the supervisors, who was a criminal supervisor, said, there's no such thing as Chinese intelligence. Why are you guys even here? Why don't you go and do something else? And the Chinese, intelligence supervisors are, wait a minute, we've got all kinds of cases. Well, compare that with today, where we know there's a huge effort to get into our technology. They, as I said at one point several weeks ago, they hacked into the Office of Personnel Management. So they have, all the information they need about me. If I have financial difficulties, there might be a knock on the door. I don't have to tell you the rest. But yes, they're all broken down into squads according to the way the FBI is organized at headquarters.
Thank you. I understand, I just read today, TikTok is actually a Chinese spy device that it knows, it now they can tap into your keystrokes and know what you've written.
Yeah.
If you have TikTok on your
That's true.
machine.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill.
You're welcome.
Carl Walsh, and then Alan.
Yeah, Bill, I've always been curious, the relationship between the FBI and the CIA. It seems that particularly in foreign matters, they overlap. I'm just wondering how the information flow is. Are there turf wars? How does that work?
Yes. I'll tell you, I'll give you a good example, Carl. The Maverick case that I mentioned, the Libyan asset that was being recruited by the Libyan intelligence in Tripoli. I learned from him that, all we needed to know to determine what to do with him. Okay, if he had been useful in counterintelligence locally, let's say he was able to tell us about a network of Libyan agents or assets locally, we would have kept him within our portfolio. But I was in touch with a Arabic-speaking CIA officer, I can't remember his name now, probably wasn't his real name anyway. He and I started working together. And so I brought him into the case. And he said, this guy could have some use if we sent him back to Libya. And he worked in the Libyan intelligence office in Tripoli. I said, well, I think that's the way to go, because we don't really have anything in the way of a Libyan intelligence network in the San Francisco division. So that's the way it went. We turned it over to him and he went back there. Of course, at that point I lost all contact. I wasn't briefed because it was not in my need to know, as they say in classified circles. Anyway, that's a perfect example of how we work with the CIA. They basically, what we would do is tee up possible CIA assets of whatever stripe, turn it over to them if we didn't have any use for them locally, and they would they would turn them over to a CIA officer in Moscow who is posing as a embassy official, like second secretary or something. That's the Soviets do the same thing, and then the contact and operation would continue over there.
Hey, Bill, I have a question, and I'm not sure if you can answer it at all. You've been out of the FBI for a while, but it seems to me from a lot of news reports that I've been reading over the last 10, 15 years or so that the FBI, at least in Washington, D.C., at the upper levels has become more and more politicized. I'd like to know if you can address that.
How much time do you have?
A lot.
Alan, you'll have to probably at least buy me one beer, if not two drafts.
You got it. Anytime you want.
And the answer to your question is yes.
I'm going to take you up on those beers.
Okay.
Say, Bill, quick question. Did you ever have any contact with J. Edgar Hoover?
Yes, he dinged me because I was a new agent in Tulsa, and late at night I put together a package of communications that had some sensitive material in it and forgot to stamp it on the outside and sent it off in the mail. So he sent me a nice little personal note saying, congratulations, you are a dummy. You violated bureau policies, blah, 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 blah. But I've got his signature in blue ink.
Uh-huh.
Even, you know, moistened and it's a real signature. That's the only contact I had.
Yeah, he was director, I believe, for 38 years.
He died in 72. I was in the Chicago office when he died in May of 72. And the first female agent came in not long after that. So, you know, things were beginning to open up after he died in terms of person. Although we had black agents in the Chicago office. One was, his name's John Housley. He was a great guy. He was on the fugitive squad. Claire got a job as a file clerk on the fugitive squad in Chicago. And they would, you know, they would ask him to put on a UPS uniform and go out to Altgeld Gardens or Cabrini Green, which Susan knows all about, I'm sure, if they're still there, and try to get these fugitives. And he was very successful at it. He'd get through the door with the UPS uniform. And anyway, so that was kind of a watershed moment.
So Bill, was Hoover a cross-dresser?
No. Let me tell you, I'll just make a quick comment about that. And, you know, you can imagine that over the years, I've heard comments about Hoover being a homosexual or whatever, you know, having different sexual appetites. I can almost bet my career and my life on it that he was not, because he was very strict. He was very regimented. And like I said, you know, a little mistake about the mailing. He came down on people. And if you really screwed up, you get transferred to the office in Butte, Montana. Now, for the hunters and fishermen, that was great. It's like the old tale, don't throw me in the bramble bush, you know. But he was, and if he had been, I'll almost guarantee the way agents are, they would have found out and they would have blown him out of the water. I mean, basically. So it didn't happen. So I'm concluding from the circumstantial evidence that it did not exist.
Thank you.
Fred, you're next.
Are you saying that women were kept out because of Hoover?
Well, I can't say that definitively. You know, it's all kind of circumstantial. I'll say that I never ran into, before my transfer to the Chicago office in when it was 71, I didn't run into any female special agents. But at that point, you know, it was maybe coincidental, I don't know, that the first female agent, I think she was in the Chicago office, because I think Claire commented on it. And she was working as a file clerk, as I mentioned. So after that, of course, I worked with plenty of female agents over my career and enjoyed working with all of them, except for one. I won't mention him. But I mean, that was true of male and female. There were good agents and there were kind of medium type, you know, abilities, and there were some poor agents. But for the most part, like the one that I worked with on the White Collar Crime Squad, she was a pistol. I mean, she's something else.
Bill, I'm so glad you became an FBI agent to help us with all the things that you do. I feel terrible and disgusted that when you try to go to Stanford and go to the English department, that you were rejected in such a terrible way. I'm glad that you still took it up and started your great writing and pursued that passion of yours anyway, because it's such an important part of who you are. But I just want to say how much I appreciate you and thank you for your service and thank you for these great stories. And I appreciate you and Claire so very much.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your comments. It's just that you could have given me a little bit more help on getting my 3 books into the New York Times bestseller list, but you didn't.
We need a renewed effort on that.
They're out of print.
Well, we know how one person got on the New York Times bestseller list. Paid people to get the list of bookstores that were counted and made quite a splash on that. But what I love that you said that I think is just spun in my head is that you swore an oath, and I wrote it down, to protect the Constitution from enemies, both foreign and domestic. we need to put that for frontlets between thine eyes, mine eyes.
Mhm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And,
Thank you.
oh, and one thing, in 2016, I believe it was, President Obama closed part of the Green Street Russian consulate because they found there were spies, and their lead spy was a chef. I'm thinking, did he screw up the borscht and that's how they found him? But he went undercover as a chef.
Yeah, interesting.
All right, any other questions?
Yeah. Hey, Bill, are you familiar with the book Killers of the Flower Moon, The Birth of the FBI and the Deaths of the Osage Nation?
One of the best books I ever read.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It's odd that the FBI sprang out of Native American murders, but it's a really good read.
There's some other ones that you might want to pick up on. One is and it has to do with the evolution of the FBI. Public Enemies tells a great story about how the Bureau shifted gears from accountants and lawyers walking around with suits and little pens in their pockets to actual effective law enforcement officers across the board. They had to actually recruit some Texas Rangers to get in there to get those gangs that were taken off the banks, you know?
Yeah.
It's called Public Enemies by Brian Burrow.
Well,
And the other one is The FBI by Ron Kessler. Oh, and this is one I have not read yet, but it's kind of a downer because it was one of us in our ranks who sold out the store and caused the deaths of 11 CIA agents over in Moscow. The name of the book is A Spy in Plain Sight by Liz Wheel, W-I-E-H-L. And it's about Robert Hansen, who was in
Oh, right,
one of the most
yeah.
disastrous foreign counterintelligence episodes we've had in the Bureau. He's still in jail. He will die in jail, I hope.
By the way, Killers of the Flower Moon is coming out on Apple TV and Netflix. Leonardo DiCaprio, Robert De Niro, big cast.
Yeah.
Should be out quite soon. They say fall.
Yeah, I want to see that for sure.
Major cast.
Oh,
That's great. Thank you.
All right, Alan, you have a question?
Yeah, Bill, quickly, can you confirm or deny whether or not Marty Majalski actually had anything to do with the FBI ever?
Yes, I can confirm that he was noted in the office as one of the special agents that you wanted next to you if you're in a crowd of Russian speakers. He excelled in the language. He was involved in some of the most consequential investigations of the activities of the GRU and KGB on Green Street at the consulate.
Marty, you're muted.
That's what I heard about it.
Yeah.
Unmute Marty.
Good guy.
Will you repeat that and speak into my button, please? This is being recorded. Beep, beep.
I'm immune now. I'm out of the Bureau.
I have a question. Fred, did you have your hand up? Go ahead. Come on.
Well, one, can the program committee book Marty to tell his stories?
No.
And Bill, do you have one final adventure tale that you would have liked to put in your speech, but you ran out of time?
Well, let's see. There are some other incidents, of course, some other matters which would take too long, you know, it'd burn up all the time. But just real quickly, and this is an example of you know, it's kind of a housekeeping tale. How did Bureau agents handle the high cost of living in major cities when they were assigned to New York, for instance? One of our compatriots here that Marty will know ended up in New York. It's so expensive to live in New York that he and his buddies had to live in Pennsylvania. It was a 2-hour drive to New York. So they'd leave at like 5 o'clock in the morning in a carpool. So they call him Doc. was at the curb at 5 o'clock in the morning. Carpool pulls up. He opens the door of the car in the back seat and throws his pillow in because he was going to sack it, And then for some reason, walked around the back of the car and was going to get it on the other side. Well, they take off in the meantime. They took off, leaving him standing at the curb. So they're headed for New York, and everybody's kind of woozy anyway because it's so early. They get to the New York field office and look in the back seat. Pops is not there. Don Ulrich was his name. Don Ulrich. He wasn't in the back seat. He said, "My God, what happened to Don? Did he fall out on the bridge?" They went into a panic mode. I mean, they really got stressed out. Should we tell the supervisor? What should we do? So they said, well, let's start with his wife. Well, by this time, Don had walked back into his house and explained what happened. He said, hey, look, Leslie, I forget her name. If they call up, just say, you haven't seen me. They did call up. She said, you guys were in charge of Don. What did you do with him? My husband is missing. And so there was a big turmoil. So they finally decided, I guess they finally figured out what happened, but they almost each had a heart attack. So there were two guys actually, two in the front. A simple thing like a commute turns into a big case.
All before cell phones where you could.
Yeah, right, no cell phones and nothing. That was funny.
All right. If no more questions, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Bill.
Great talking to you.